We have Natasha Fernandez here from Brooklyn, New York. She will be helping co-host with Gabby and talking about certain insidious cases of trusted advisor abuse. And our main host is the director and founder of the California Center of Excellence for Trauma-Informed Care, Gabriela Grant.
Well, thank you very much, Sydney. And I wanted to let everyone know that Sydney is available to problem solve technology-related issues. And then we also have Natasha, who is going to be coming in as my co-host today. So, Natasha, thank you very much. Natasha, can you throw up that link to the spirituality handout? I'll be talking about that. But folks, you guys can get that link for a handout that we're going to be talking about today, as well as other materials as it's discussed. So I want to thank everybody for being here. We're about to get started. We intend to record today's webinar and edit it and make it available on our website. We also are in the midst of developing a tab or trusted advisor abuse related podcast, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. Okay, so without any further ado, let's get going. So we're really going to be talking about something called trusted advisor abuse and how to stop it. So I'm going to break this down in a variety of different ways so that we can start to understand how to become increasingly aware of trusted advisor abuse. This webinar is going to focus on the self-help field in particular, and we're going to be talking about a specific case with Natasha's assistance. So allow me to start with a little clip. And this clip is from a podcast called The Reckoning. And it is The Road to the Royal Commission on Child Abuse, a stupendous investigation into the widespread abuse of children throughout Australia. So it's a very, very important Royal Commission, something that we might be able to use perhaps for some of our systems that have been infiltrated and taken over by trusted advisor abusers. So allow me to play this snippet here. I think I have to get rid of my pen. And then, hold on. Maybe, no. Hold on. It worked before. It really did when we just did this. Okay, there it goes. Closer. Oh, good to hear Julia Gillard talking about the Royal Commission.
They've not only had their trust betrayed by the abuser, but other adults who could have acted to assist them have failed to do so. There have been revelations of child abusers being moved from place to place rather than the nature of their abuse and their crimes being dealt with. There have been...
So I really like that snippet because, Natasha, let me bring you in right here. Thank you very much for finding that snippet for me. But I really like that snippet, Natasha, because I think it really tells us right away something about trusted advisor abuse. And what it tells us is that there's an abuser, but then there's a bunch of accomplices. And that these accomplices might even involve the entire organization. So trusted advisor abuse is not about a single perpetrator. It is about a system or an organization or a network that is wittingly or unwittingly accomplishing group. So that's one of the things that I really like about that snippet. Natasha, was there anything about that snippet that spoke to you? I'm just wondering.
Yeah, no, I basically agree with what you said. I feel like trusted advisor abuse, what makes it so different from any other type of abuse is that there's a lot of complicitness and it's like a whole system and it's not just like a one-on-one thing. There's a whole, web of things that come into creating what it is, trusted advisor abuse.
Yes. That's right. It's an alternate reality web, and it requires more than one person to create this alternate reality. Yes. So today we're going to be talking about how to stop trusted advisor abuse and fundamentally how to protect yourself from it. Because here's what I'm going to say is that humans are very vulnerable to trusted advisor abuse. And my hope is that after today's presentation, you're going to start recognizing it a little bit more and then maybe even calling it by its name. Thank you very much, Natasha. Great to have you on today's webinar. So we already mentioned that it will be recorded. We'll probably edit out some of the little typos or whatever, but the whole thing should be online and available in just a week. I want to thank, first of all, Lorena, who in the class of 2019, Amherst College, was my summer intern who really got the whole thing started. We originally called it Complaint Web. She still calls it Complaint Web. But from this idea of people don't know where to complain about people when they do these things, emerged this concept called trusted advisor abuse. So what was originally called Complaint Web has now muted into understanding the perpetrative dynamics. So thank you very much, Lorena. I also want to thank Sarah and Sydney and Natasha, who are all on today's call. They're also interns from Amherst College, going through Amherst College during a pandemic right now. And I want to thank all of you, and in particular, Natasha, who is in her last week of her summer internship. So I'm going to wish her very well, but we're going to enjoy her during our webinar. So thanks you guys. Without you, we really wouldn't be able to send out this information. Information that, at least in my opinion, is pretty essential. So I mentioned that we have a podcast. It's very new. We're really just kind of getting to grips with what this means to be a podcaster. But the podcast is called Safety Before Trust: Protect Yourself from Control, Manipulation, and Abuse. So, that's basically what we're going to be talking about. Our first episode will be looking at the failures of both the sports and academic worlds in their lack of ability to keep children safe from Larry Nassar. So that's a fascinating case, and we're really looking at the failure of those systems to protect children, to allow themselves to be taken over by Larry Nassar. We also have a website launch party, which you all are very much invited to. And if someone can throw up, Sydney or Sarah or Natasha, if somebody could throw up in the chat box how to register for our Funfetti themed launch party. We are going to be showing and showcasing our new and improved website, included the Stop Trusted Advisor Abuse section. So join us for that party. But I wanted to let everybody look briefly at what is currently our website. Keep in mind, on August 21st, there might be a different look and feel. But here it is currently. There's a lot of information. You're going to see over here that there's a lot of links on reasons to consider a complaint. Just having kind of a creepy feeling about somebody is enough to really register a complaint. I'm not saying that that's enough to take a person's license from them, but it's enough to register a complaint. And that's what we really want to do with trusted advisor abuse, is we want to start paying attention to that safety instinct we have, and let people know about it, that's going to help us to protect ourselves and also vulnerable populations like children. Here's a list, an infinite list of reported cases of trusted advisor abuse as published in credible newspapers. We really focus on your rights as a consumer, your rights as a citizen, your rights as a person who has vulnerabilities or maybe even disabilities. So knowing your rights is something that we really focus on in helping people to protect themselves from trusted advisor abuse. For California, what we've done is we have kind of given a shortcut to be able to file complaints via licensing bodies or other professional watchdog organizations. It's not easy. We also are happy to advocate and assist somebody in making these complaints. Advocacy groups fighting abuse within their various professions, but often without this bigger understanding of trusted advisor abuse. So it kind of seems like folks are dealing with similar issues, but, you know, is abuse by a priest really the same thing as abused by a teacher? Kind of, not really. What's the difference? We don't know, but they're different, so we'll address them differently. So in many cases, having this understanding of trusted advisor abuse is going to allow us to join forces with a lot more organizations. We also have additional resources that has a lot of interesting stuff that we've just found along the way. And then we have our area for webinars. So this is where you'll be able to find it. Natasha is going to throw in a link to a white paper on spirituality and trauma recovery. Can spirituality help people recover after trauma? Given our topic today, I really want to encourage people to check out this handout, which, if we click on it, gives a research basis of spirituality as a path for healing post-trauma, but it also balances it with information about trusted advisor abuse when spiritual advisors abuse and institutions fail. So we're really not leading people down an uncritical pathway. We're giving people this ability to protect themselves even when they're working on spiritual or self-help or self-recovery kind of topics. And then we have something that Lorena created, a spirituality self-questionnaire, which just allows people to kind of look at different words and decide which ones are meaningful to them and which ones, you know, they have different feelings around. So it's very self-directed. Okay, so I just want to bring in Natasha right now, because I know that she went over a lot of the website for trusted advisor abuse and got to grips with this topic. And I just want to ask her, Natasha, what were some of the things about trusted advisor abuse that you learned via the website or exploring this topic this summer?
One main thing that I learned about trusted advisor abuse is how, I guess, prominent it is in the media, and how you can kind of overlook it and not realize that it is trusted advisor abuse. You know, even for example, like the Larry Nassar case that we see here, and just with like priests and teachers and, you know, yoga instructors, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. You know something, Natasha, that's an excellent point, which is this thing that we're going to now call trusted advisor abuse has often been dealt with in a tabloid fashion. You know, female teacher, you know, has sex with young man, tabloid fodder for years. You know, full movies have been made based on these tabloid reportings. And the thing about the tabloids is that they look at salacious details and voyeuristic understandings of these kind of dynamics, and they hardly approach things from a trusted advisor perspective, which is, what was the system and how did the system fail? So it's interesting when it all goes wrong for the trusted advisor who abuses. When it all goes wrong, the organization wants nothing to do with them. You know, after it's all out, all of a sudden they're pariahs and they're left to their own devices. But you'll see right before that, the organization was definitely, you know, self-protective and protecting itself very strongly. Excellent points, by the way, Natasha. So we here at the California Center of Excellence for Trauma-Informed Care consider ourselves to be advocates in disseminating information about trusted advisor abuse. And we sent out letters related to the Larry Nassar case to the U.S. representatives on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee that was looking into U.S. Olympics. We wrote to the Safe Sport .org directors, a legislated organization that is now supposed to protect Olympic level and elite athletes. We wrote to U.S. Gymnastics representatives Carrie Perry and Suzanne Lyons. And then we have kind of recently addressed a Chelsea Piers gymnastics case with a private gymnasium. So that's kind of the thing that we do. So trusted advisor abuse is a form of perpetration. However, as we mentioned before, it's not just the perpetrator that's involved here. There's other layers. So it's sometimes better to understand trusted advisor abuse as, yes, an abuser who puts themselves in a position to advise people based on trust, right? So we're going to get to that abuser eventually. But it turns out that trusted advisor abuse flourishes in a society or in a system or in a culture where there are very few protections for victims. And where there are those protections, they are hard fought and often watered down over time, hard fought by the victims and then watered down by the system. And as a matter of fact, in these cultures or systems or society, most of the protections are actually for the perpetrators. Oh, we can't destroy people's reputations, or, oh no, that would never happen. So these kind of societies, cultures, and systems are ripe for takeover by trusted advisor abusers. So this is kind of broader, but then there's an organization, right? So within this context of a society or system or culture, then there's a community or organization that really identifies community-wise, organizationally, that this person over here is a good person. This person is held up as a good person. What people almost always say, before, during, or after, is, oh, I know this person. They would never do something like that, right? Well, have you been with this person 24/7? How do you know what this person is doing? So they often see the abusers as good people. Their reputations are something that the organization has accommodated, has hung its own hat on. That there is a symbiosis between the abuser and the organization. There's also a lot of claims of, hey, we didn't know about it, or we tried to do something about it, but, and therefore, these folks are classic bystanders, but who have or should have had knowledge, which means that they're actually accomplices. So being just simply unaware is not an excuse. It does not get anybody off the hook. If anything, it kind of keeps you very much on the hook. Well, how did you not know, right? How did you not know what was going on? On the perpetrator perspective, the perpetrator is looking for situations that are inherent imbalances of power: a doctor and a patient, a priest and a parishioner, a coach and an athlete, a guru and a follower, financial advisor and, an older adult on fixed income. Any number of those kind of situations, there is an imbalance of power. And also that the person who's in this lesser position knows that they are in this lesser position, right? The student knows, the athlete knows, the parishioner knows, the follower knows who's got more power. And that the powerful, however, even though they have this power, they actually take no responsibility for anything that goes on. So it's an interesting dynamic of an imbalance of power where the powerful, when held to account, abdicates their personal power and then blames usually the victim. So here now we have the victim over here. First of all, an individual victim or a population of victims, so an individual gymnast, of any name, or a group of gymnasts, right? So an individual member who follows a guru, or followers of the guru, right? So whether this individual is a collective group, however, this individual or this group of individuals are vulnerable in some way. They're vulnerable first and foremost because there's that imbalance of power. They're further made vulnerable because who they are or what they represent is seen as lesser than. In addition to that, there is a community or organization around them that is upholding the abuser as a very good person and not listening to the victims who are lesser voices. And that is within a larger society where victims are actually very vulnerable, right? So this population here, the victim population, is a very vulnerable population. But their fear is, as vulnerable as I am right now, or whatever might be happening to me right now, worse is going to come down the pike if I'm not actually just compliant and doing what is expected by multiple layers, right? Not just by the abuser. The abuser leverages that community and societal, claimed ignorance, feigned ignorance, in support of their position. The victim often hopes for a hero to protect themselves, right? So you can see it, for example, with the Larry Nassar case, that gymnasts wanted to trust Larry. They wanted Larry to be the hero that protects them from the mean coaches or the difficult sport or the pain or whatever it is, right? So there's this sense that's built in that, somebody's going to come in and kind of figure out what's going on here. But that hero usually harms the victim. And now the victim kind of feels like, well, I kind of deserved it maybe because, I was hoping that this person was going to, help me out here. And I trusted this person. So I really shouldn't have. And maybe I trusted this person when I knew I shouldn't have. So then I'm doubly to blame. So what's interesting about the victim is that the victim gets blamed by the perpetrator. The victim gets blamed by the organization. The victim gets blamed by the society. And the victim often very strongly blames themselves. And it is often for this reason that many victims do not come forward, do not report, do not either or minimize, and in some cases might even protect or continue to promote or support the abuser. So I want to bring Natasha in just as a little chat, and also to encourage people to go to the chat box if anybody has any questions or any comments. And Natasha, in particular, any questions or comments or thoughts about this multi-layer system of abuse?
Yeah, I just think that this whole system is what really makes trusted advisor abuse so lethal against the victim themselves, because it's these huge power dynamics. Like, they're not just going against their abuser, they're going against the whole community, the organization, the society, the systems, the culture. Like, it's a much bigger game that they're playing.
Yeah. And and even the victim often later in life, right, looks back and was like, how come I didn't do more? That invisible pressure, Natasha, that you just talked about, it keeps people compliant, that fearing worse that's going to happen is often because this individual or this population of individuals knows that worse is possible. And maybe compliance is going to somehow work. Unfortunately, compliance doesn't work. But then when the victim submits, right, when the victim is there being victimized, has this, encounter, there is so much self-blame, but then the perpetrator uses that and then uses all of these other forces against that individual. It is very powerful, but it's also in many ways very invisible. And the canary in the coal mine, of course, is going to be the victim. The victim is going to manifest physically or behaviorally or vocally a disturbance. But then all of these layers are going to blame that victim. And if anybody's ever been in that position, Natasha, it feels unbearable. It feels unbearable. And as you mentioned, lethal, in the sense that many people in these situations might actually consider suicide, or perhaps less commonly homicide, but would consider suicide as a solution to this problematic. Natasha, did anybody go to the chat box? Let's hear if we've got any questions or comments.
As of now, we don't have any questions or comments, but again, I just want to encourage everyone to write in the chat box. We want to hear from you.
Yeah. And sometimes, Natasha, there's a little bit of a lag. So as soon as I turn the slide, you're going to get something, and then all of a sudden we're going to go back, but that's fine. So feel free to interrupt and we can go back a slide. So without a name to call it, nobody knows what it is. This was true for domestic violence. When we used to call it things like spouse abuse or bad marriage or alcohol problem or, poverty problem or unemployment problem or personal problem, and that was in my lifetime. In my lifetime, domestic violence was not the go-to word. And instead, everybody just had to call it without a name. And once we started understanding the name domestic violence, now we can start to uncover the perpetration of domestic violence. Without a name, it continued, right? Same thing with sexual assault. Sexual assault, rape, sexual assault, when we weren't calling it by its name, it just continued. Everybody could call it something else, he said, she said, for example. That was pretty much through my entire first 30 years of life. It was basically called he said, she said, right? But now we call it sexual assault. The same thing with workplace harassment. Workplace harassment, once it got a name, now we can understand the dynamics. It's, I have to do something for my boss in order for me to stay employed, and that thing might even be sexual or illegal or unethical, but I'm going to do it because I know this guy can fire me and all these other things will happen. So trusted advisor abuse is like domestic violence, but it's not domestic violence because there's not an official public relationship. It's like a sexual assault and rape because the motivations of the abuser are often sexual motivations, but not always, right? And yet, even when there is no sex involved, there is still a coercive process where the victim does things that the victim would not have otherwise done and really doesn't want to do and really isn't consenting, but it doesn't look like active rebellion either. And then workplace harassment. It's like workplace harassment, except that usually the person being harassed is not another employee or a boss-employee situation. It's an employee against a child, an employee against a client, an employee against, or a volunteer employee against an athlete. So trusted advisor abuse is similar to and connected to other forms of perpetration, but it turns out it's its own form of perpetration. And until we have a name for it, nobody really knows what it is. In this case, this was a coach, I think in Oregon, maybe in Washington. And here's one person. I'm writing as a concerned parent. I feel that some of the things that are going on with WSU are completely out of control. But this parent doesn't know what to call it, completely out of control, right? Oh, well, that's a matter of opinion, right? Or here's another person, football phone calls to chew players out at 2 a.m. Sunday morning, the sand pit, turning fire hoses and knocking players down, constant belittling. I wouldn't have played for Leach. Sooner or later, you're going to get sued over Leach. So, I don't know who wrote that, but it sounds like someone who is kind of like a lawyer or an investigator who's just like, okay, I'm going to write these things down. I don't know even what to do with them. And I definitely don't know what to call it. And then here you see an employee speaking. As I transition out of day-to-day football coverage, I want to reiterate my concerns about player health and safety, which we have discussed at various times over the past 9 months. As you know, my concerns revolve around certain practices of the coaching staff. Well, what practices and what coaching staff, right? So this person's kind of doing what's called a CYA, but they're not really being that clear. They're also being a skedaddle that put the health and safety of the student athletes at risk. In particular, these practices include punishment workouts that are dangerously excessive. Thank you for your continued help in these matters. So, dangerously excessive punishment workouts. What are we talking about here? What I'm going to suggest is what is often going on when we don't have a name for it might even be trusted advisor abuse. So trusted advisor abuse occurs when a person in a position of trust, such as a teacher, faith minister, therapist, doctor, nurse, treatment provider, lawyer, coach, yoga instructor, or financial planner, uses that position of trust to gain access to preferred victims and then abuse and control that patient, that client, that parishioner, or those athletes. This abuse is typically relational, whereby what that means is that the victim is not just dealing with Larry Nassar. The victim is dealing with a doctor, right? A priest, a teacher. That, as a matter of fact, that role, that relational role, precedes the individual personality. So what that means is that the abuse is typically relational, whereby the person abused feels a special bond or connection with the trusted advisor. And what that bond is that trust bond that we've all felt, that we've all enjoyed, that strong tractor beam connection that people who trust each other feel for each other. But as a result of having that bond, that special bond or connection, it almost like severing it or revealing this person to be not trustworthy or damaging this person's role would affect far many more people than just little old me. And therefore, betrayal seems worse than the abuse itself. That I'm going to, for this abuser, put up with what's going on, right? That it almost feels that the loyalty towards this individual who I trust, who the world trusts, that any betrayal of that loyalty is worse than the abuse itself, which, as everybody is saying, is no big deal. Trusted advisor abuse is cloaked by societal messages and expectations about trust. And in particular, that trust is a good thing, and it's a good thing to give to people, and it's a good thing to get from people. And it also comes with messages about who should be trusted. People in authority, people in uniform, people with degrees, people with letters after their name, people who, have fancy offices, people who have lots of accolades, people who are financially looking good, right? People who are well respected. He's well respected. People who are accomplished. But one of the interesting things that I think our case is going to show, Natasha, is that many times this trust business is really the person in authority is actually proven to be very untrustworthy. The person who is well respected actually does not respect anybody else, perhaps even themselves. And that many of their accomplishments, Natasha, are actually false claims that are completely invented. So, as I said, ripped from the tabloids, we see a lot of these cases of trusted advisor abuse, from professors over here, Dartmouth professors, but I have to say that Amherst College has shown itself to be less than stellar on addressing sexual abuse by professors. Here is a cult leader who branded sex slaves. Here is Nassar, Southern Baptist abuse scandal, Oklahoma City cop convicted of rape, Catholic Church, yoga community, right? So, these are but a sampling of the ripped from the tabloid headlines of trusted advisor abuse. It's super common. But as Natasha said, it's often not even seen as that important. It's almost something that you kind of like chuckle at or dismiss. Oh my, well, that has nothing to do with me, until of course it does have something to do with one of us, and then it changes the dynamic. Once we're involved in it, it becomes very problematic. So Natasha, I wanted to move to our case first, and wanted to bring you in to discuss one specific case, and then we'll kind of piece it apart using trusted advisor abuse as the lens. So I'm going to hand things over right now to Natasha, and I can't mute myself, but Natasha, just let me know, and I'll move a slide forward if you need to.
All right, thank you, Gabby. So we're going to be talking about this specific trusted advisor abuse case that went on in the self-help industry. And you'll see on the right, we have a picture of James Arthur Ray, who started his business in the early 90s. He was a pretty prominent self-help guru and businessman. He held business seminars. And in 2010, he was convicted of 3 counts of negligent homicide for causing the deaths of 3 participants in one of his New Age retreats. So what had happened was on October 8th, 2009, he held his New Age spiritual warrior retreat. That's what he called it. And the attendees had paid up to $10,000 to participate in this retreat. So pretty expensive. And during this retreat, they had fasted for 36 hours and they had gone 2 days without water and were left alone in the Arizona desert before entering a sweat lodge, which was part of the retreat, and it was unlicensed. And we'll see more red flags later on. And this was all according to Ray's instructions. During this sweat lodge, the site owner reported that
Natasha?
Sorry about that. My microphone is having problems. Yeah. So in the end, we found out that 20 participants had been hospitalized for dehydration. What else? Suffering burns, breathing problems, kidney failures, and elevated body temperatures. And unfortunately, 3 participants had passed away due to this. So if you move on to the next.
I just want to ask you a quick question about this. I'm a little familiar with this case. And were individuals, prevented from leaving that sweat lodge?
I believe so. I believe they were prevented from leaving the sweat lodge. It was all part of the retreat.
By what? What was preventing them from leaving the sweat lodge?
In basic terms, it was Ray's instructions. He pressured them into staying in the lodge and going through with the retreat. And also they had options. For example, like in the Arizona desert, they were all provided with sleeping bags, and for additional money, they provided them with like better sleeping bags or better conditions. So it was very motivated by money.
So there weren't actual locks or chains or anything like that prohibiting people from leaving the sweat lodge, but yet they were prohibited from leaving. And they were prohibited from leaving because Ray told them that they would be losers if they left the sweat lodge.
Mm-hmm.
So it was Ray's instructions that kept them there, but the dynamic was one of trust, right? That these individuals who had gone through all of these different mind-body challenges with Ray, spending lots of money in order to have him tell them self-help stuff, they trusted him so much that they ignored their own bodies, like complete and utter we're about to shut down and die messages. What do you think, Natasha? What do you think were some of the techniques that Ray used to get people to trust him that much?
On that note, we actually have a comment from Sydney, and she says that he used terminology like "do not be quote unquote weak," which adds to what you were saying about Ray's pressuring and basically bullying the participants. Oh, and Sydney also has asked, how was he qualified to do this retreat? Well, we'll see in the next slide. But yeah, on to the next slide. About red flags and early signs. But Ray really did not have a lot of license. He lied about his credentials and training. And if we kind of go back to 10 years before this incident, there had already been concerns that had been raised about Ray's methods by many like medical trainers and also people who have just met him and have participated in his retreats. So he engaged in unsafe practices, which included sleep deprivation, fasting, fire and glass blocking, and unlicensed sweat lodge ceremonies. So this sweat lodge ceremony that he had where the 3 people passed away was unlicensed. So he was not qualified to do that retreat in that sense. Mm-hmm. And then we see in 2005, there was an incident where a woman was pressured by Ray into shattering her hand during a quasi-martial arts board breaking exercise. So again, using terminology like do not be weak, if you can't do this, then you'll never get anywhere in life, things like that. That was his, his interpretation of motivational speaking as a self-help guru. And then we see in 2006, a man had fallen unconscious after exercise inside another sweat lodge. So that was just very early sign, very in your face red flag. And then in 2009, a woman had jumped her death after attending a seminar that was hosted by Ray. Mm-hmm. So those are just some of the red flags that we saw with James Arthur Ray in his early career. And yes, so he lied about his credentials and his trainings. He used techniques that he was not licensed to use. He led activities that he wasn't trained to lead. And he also encouraged participants to share highly personal stories, despite not being a licensed trained therapist or psychologist. So that's another aspect of him, using that trust to then commit trusted advisor abuse.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Hey, I'll tell you one thing about trusted advisor abusers, Natasha, is they love a confession. They love to make you think, hey, Natasha, if you just tell me what's on your mind, what's going on with you, what's going on with your parents, what's going on in your marriage, what's going on, whatever, financially, right? Trust me, Natasha, open up, tell me what's going on with you. And it can feel good, it can feel good to have somebody, listen and want to listen to what are really sometimes very deep secrets that people have, about themselves and their beliefs, or maybe even their own actions and what they think about themselves and what they've done in their lives. But then this person is an untrained individual with absolutely no standards of ethical, interactions with folks. So what is he motivated by? Well, I think it says it right here. He lied about his credentials and training, but somehow he got on to Oprah, and I'm not sure who Rhonda Byrne is, but I definitely know who Oprah is. Enough said, right? So how can you lie about your credentials and training do all this stuff and be picked up by Oprah and whoever Rhonda Byrne is, you know, and being shown to people as, you know, this guy is trustworthy. How does that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I really just think it goes to show how trusted advisor abuse, it really, the fame and the self-image and the reputation is what really helps it continue to happen. Like, he appeared on Oprah's show multiple times. Rhonda Byrne's actually a very famous self-help guru, and she wrote the book of The Secret. And and like his practices and his advice appeared in the book. And this is like a award-winning book that many people in the self-help industry, you know, talk about a lot. Yes, if you go back to the slide about, the red flags and early signs. Yeah, the fame and reputation is what really let him kind of go, his actions go unnoticed, the red flags ignored, until eventually, you know, it all hit rock bottom 2010, and he was sentenced to prison for 2 years. There's also $3 million settlement for the 3 victims. And also another thing, part of trusted advisor abuse is that, you know, he was targeting and exploiting his followers who, you know, were very vulnerable people. You know, they were just seeking self-improvement, seeking guidance. And, you know, even if this person, James Arthur Ray, the person that they're seeking guidance from, is bullying them and like using these terrible words and telling them that they're weak and this or that, in many cases, that's what they believe is right in that moment.
Yeah, you know, I think it is very interesting that there are people who are vulnerable because they are seeking that, Natasha, the very yearning for answers to make better sense of this mortal coil, right? That yearn, that makes that's a vulnerability. Why is it? Why is it that seekers, people who are seeking guidance or, you know, spirituality or enlightenment, what makes them so vulnerable, Natasha?
Yeah, I think the fact that they're, you know, so in a sense desperate and seeking this guidance, that, you know, maybe the first person that they get that guidance from, they immediately have like this trust connection with them. And, you know, in this case, if we have James Arthur Ray, who was like this super, like, you know, successful motivational speaker, and he's very popular in the self-help industry. And that's really the whole drive behind the self-help industry, is people who are, you know, seeking help for themselves. So even if, you know, he lied about his credentials, he lied about his training, you know, his fame and his reputation is what drives these people to, you know, be like, oh, like, I want to be like him. Like, I want advice from him.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, his reputation looked good, but it turned out it was very rotten on the inside. Now, we said, I think, you know, that people who are seeking might be, and I think you used the word desperate, right? And I think there's something to that, but maybe there's something more to that. What are seekers desperate for? What's the desperation? I'm wondering. And people, feel free to go to the chat box. I'm just wondering.
Yeah, so we have a comment from Sydney saying looking for someone to guide them as opposed to guiding themselves. So maybe that's part of the desperation.
It is part of it, but, you know, Ray was a self-help guy, you know, so he's actually like supposed to be helping people help themselves, but he's just helping himself to people. You know, I wonder if seekers, individuals who want to know more, have a specific vulnerability, which is the vulnerability to question what is. And therefore, remember how we said alternate reality? I'm wondering if seekers, I mean, this is just, you know, a question, really. I don't know the answer to it. But I'm wondering if people who are seekers of spirituality, seekers of answers, seekers of enlightenment, seekers of journey, right? To some degree, travelers in general, right? People who travel through thought or travel through space, that these individuals are actually able to consider alternative realities and therefore are vulnerable to perpetrators who are sophisticated in altering people's realities. Natasha, any thought about that?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point that you're bringing up. I think I'd have to think about it a little bit more.
You know, and to also recognize that, you know, not everybody is a seeker. So sometimes seekers might not always understand that not everybody is as in search of as they are. There are other people who are just frankly not in search of much of anything at all. But then there's others who kind of, you know, have a working answer that's just good enough for them, and they don't need to really search any further than that. So, you know, what often happens is that the non-searchers and the searchers sometimes don't understand each other. And what I know that happens then is then the non-searching society kind of shuns the seeker, but that creates more vulnerabilities. Any comments on the chat?
No comments as of now.
Okay. All right. So let's turn to like this situation, the Ray situation, and see if we can see how to prevent it from happening again. So when we understand trusted advisor abuse to having those multiple layers, what that also means is that the solution has to happen in multiple layers as well. And for the individual, we want to improve people's rights, skills, information, and awareness, right? That individuals, and for our topic today, Natasha, in particular, seekers, people who are seeking answers, enlightenment, transformation, you know, self-improvement, all those seekers are best served by becoming aware of their rights, building their own skills, having good quality information, and becoming aware, in particular, of trusted advisor abuse. So that's on the individual level. What we're also going to see is wherever an organization, right, brings together two people in any kind of an unequal power dynamic, where advice is being given, we have to have clear training, clear expectations, and clear reporting processes. And the reason why is because these perpetrators are very likable folks. People admire them. Their reputation precedes them. They have that glint, that glimmer, that je ne sais quoi that gives people that warm and fuzzy feeling. They're dangerous as a result. They're dangerous because they can make us feel good, and that good feeling can blind us to what's actually happening. For organizations, and if any of you are part of organizations, what we really want to look at in terms of our organization is transparent procedures. Like, this is how we do it. You might remember the song, "This is how we do it on Friday night," right? So this is how we do it related to trusted advisor abuse. You know, we train on it to prevent it. We have a clear reporting program, and we report and we take notes of all reports. You know, of course, innocent until proven guilty, but let's get the proof so that we can prove innocence and guilt, right? And then on the society level, clearly we need better laws. You know, in these United States, our system tends to be skewed towards protecting the rights of the accused. And, you know, I definitely agree with that. Those are aspects of our Constitution and what has led to a reasonably robust legal system. I know it's worthy of a critique, right? But we have these foundational protections for the accused, and that's very, very important. But where are the protections for the vulnerable and for the victims? You know, it kind of has to go in both directions. It can't only go in the direction of the accused. So what we're really talking about is holding society or ourselves collectively more responsible on many levels for trusted advisor abuse. That we have these overall messages about the value of certain people and certain children, and certain groups and certain genders and certain races and certain ethnicities and certain all kinds of stuff that often leads people to be even more vulnerable. The messages may seem positive, but they can actually hide a very negative message. For example, athletes are strong and can take care of themselves. But what if the person is stronger and has more power than them? How is the athlete supposed to deal with that now? We don't really question that. We're just like, oh, you're big and strong. You should be able to take care of yourself. And if you can't, then it's your own fault. But even more importantly, I think the society creates the tone of the environment, and who do the laws protect and who gets punished, and how long do they get punished for, and for what kind of crimes are they getting punished. And this is really a feedback mechanism to help us to improve that criminal justice system. It just needs to be used so that we get better outcomes, not so people can kind of individually or even relationally manipulate it for their own outcomes. And in addition, we also have to recognize that we have very strong religious and cultural messages in these United States about right and wrong and strong and weak and good and bad and who's up and who's down and who's with us and who's against us. So, as Americans, we have a built-in vulnerability because, Natasha, let me just bring you in here for a second. If I come from a really strong us against them culture, right? That's my culture. It's us against everybody else, right? And I'm sure we can all identify a couple of groups like this in our own experience, right? How is that dangerous to the individuals inside this culture? It's us against them.
Yeah, so that would be dangerous because, when having that mentality of us against them, like if there's individuals that are part of your own group, part of your own culture, who actually engage in like abusive behaviors, there's less accountability for them because of that us against them mentality.
Yeah. Oh, he's with us, but he's abusing me. Well, maybe it's not abuse because he's with us, right? And then the opposite too, which is anybody who's not us is bad, but maybe some of them can actually protect me, but I'm not going to go there because that's them. That's not us. So it's a double whammy, really. An us against them mentality makes me doubly vulnerable because I'm probably not going to report on people who abuse me from the inside, but I'm also not going to look externally for protections. So, as Americans, we like to think of ourselves as being able to, I don't know. I would just, generally broadly call it open up a can of whoop ass and get started, right? I as an American, that sounds like American culture to me. So we have an inherent built-in vulnerability to trusted advisor abuse as a result, because we already think I should be able to protect myself. I know what's best for me. Other people can't tell me what to do. And that makes us even more vulnerable. And then in particular, I think America has a lot of very strong messages about authority and who to trust and who to obey. And I definitely think that affects our reporting in our culture. Who gets reported? Who gets reported for almost nothing, right, Natasha? Who gets reported for looking through binoculars at birds, and who doesn't get reported? On that organizational level, there's a couple of things, which is to clarify the procedure to report and investigate abuse or violations of boundaries, to make it a pretty sensitive line so that people report it sooner rather than later. We can't have that line be all the way over at child, sexual assault, child sexual abuse. We have to have that line much earlier than that there's these earlier transgressions that need to be reported. The agency or cooperative or university or faith-based nonprofit, school, or other entity that employs, certifies, ordains, or otherwise oversees or includes the abuser, meaning any organization that gives that abuser the title, is allowing both access and coverage. So be very careful. Entities within which abuse has happened often have poorly managed oversight procedures and may be very focused on its own status, its own prestige, its own ranking, its own budget. This blindness to trusted advisor abuse, because the organization is blinded by its own status, prestige, or ranking, is exactly the organization that the trusted advisor abuse is going to look for. So it makes you vulnerable, you know. Wanting to be the best sounds like a positive message, but it actually creates vulnerabilities that people might not even recognize. And these preferences often sacrifice reporting and investigation because they're going to ding, well, I don't want to look into that. That's going to ding our reputation. Well, we can't have people talking about our organization like that. You know, we're going to have to protect the abuser. So what ends up happening is now that the community's the organizational community reputation is now somehow wed to the abuser's reputation. And now we're all going to go in no good direction. On that relational aspect, and Natasha, I think this is a good place for us to bring in Seek Safely as an organization. Between this interpersonal and this individual aspect, that on the relational level, when I'm working with somebody, especially somebody who is vulnerable, that there's clear expectations about safety and where to report if there's a violation or how to report if there's a violation. Trusted advisor abuse requires a relationship, and the victim is often connected to friends and patients who might also be victims, who might have also been groomed, who might also have a skewed understanding of this person. And then once undermined, the process of trusting someone in authority becomes very problematic for victims. And part of the problem with reporting and investigating, because now I have to trust another person. So, imagine, you've been abused by a teacher, and then it's going to be other teachers or other educators that are going to be asking you to trust them. You've been abused by a police officer, and it's going to be other police officers that are going to require you to, quote unquote, trust them. It becomes very, very challenging. On the individual level, we want to increase that knowledge of skills and rights, of information, of who are their advocates. And that all of these individuals have their own unique experiences and individual strengths and challenges. But the overall feature that we're going to identify is a vulnerability. And that vulnerability is going to highlight one person, and kind of like dim down another person. So explicit rights related to protection and investigation, and then building skills related to speaking up, acting on your own behalf, on your own safety, and building people who do believe you, who are out there, and available. So, Natasha, let's go to the organization that we learned a little bit about due to the Ray case. Did you want to guide us in a little conversation about Seek Safely?
Yeah, so the Seek Safely organization was created by one of the victims' families, Kerry Brown, and they created Seek Safely to bring positive purpose, right, to those who were victimized by James Arthur Ray. So the main purpose of the organization was, to keep those who seek help with personal or professional growth safe from physical, emotional, and financial harm. So, it's about providing the protections for the vulnerable and the victims, while also holding self-help gurus and self-help practitioners, and also the organizations and the systems, help keep them all accountable for how they handle interactions with their clients. And so one thing that the Seek Safely organization did was they created the Seek Safely Promise, which is a commitment or a pledge of integrity that lists out regulations and basic standards for self-help providers which was created with the customers in mind, to provide protections for them.
And I snippeted it.
Nice.
And so here is the promise, which, by the way, according to a podcast called Guru, Ray has refused to sign this promise today. He's out of jail and reconditioning himself, but he has not made this promise. And you can see here the promise. This is with self-help, because self-help is not regulated. There's no licensing body, so there's no ethical standards. So this is kind of like a self-certification of being truthful, accurate, respectful, protective, having integrity, and being safe. Pretty basic stuff. And yet, some gurus are just simply not going to be willing to make that promise. So Seek Safely is a great organization that kind of helps us to see that relational and individual aspect, right? So individuals can go on to Seek Safely and learn their rights, learn more skills, get connected to safe individuals. So that's fantastic. And Natasha, let's make sure that Seek Safely is on our Trusted Advisor website by the end of the week. Was there anything else about Seek Safely that impressed you? Or
yeah, I mean, Seek Safely, they also, that's not the only thing they've done. They also have a lot of other resources. They have a self-help like fact sheet. They also recently, I think it was the mother of Kirby Brown and the sister, they wrote a book and it came out, I think like not even 2 months ago. So if anyone wants to check that out too, I think it's called, let's see, How We Lived After Kirby Brown's Death, something like that. You could get it on Amazon and other websites. So I will link that in the chat. I'll link the website, I'll link the book and the resources.
Yeah. So, one of the things that ends up happening is, a family like Kirby Brown's family is like, what is going on? How can this person do these things without anybody stopping them? And then they come to understand that there's a completely unregulated wild west of self-help out there. So, if you are a seeker, or if you know somebody who is a seeker, I highly recommend, first of all, talking about trusted advisor abuse, because individuals who are seekers are at increased risk. But then also the Seek Safely organization, so that they can seek safely with other people who are seekers, but who also really much prioritize safety. That is a great example of trusted advisor abuse on so many different levels. He was on the societal level a success, in spite of the fact that he lied about many of his accolades. On an organizational level, it was all about this guy. He was being held up as better than everybody else. On the relational level, he knew his power imbalance, and he looked for people who would be willing to pay him a lot of money to do things that were potentially self-destructive. And if you look at the community of individuals that he gathered around him, first of all, you're going to find a lot of seekers, but individuals who, felt that their connection to the guru was as important, or maybe even more important than their very own lives. So, you can see with this case, all those layers of trusted advisor abuse. So how are we going to do this? As organizations, we want to do three things. As individuals, we want to do these things too, but, I'm just going to focus on the organizational level. So first, we want our organization to prevent trusted advisor abuse. So we've got things like background checks, and we have things like references, and we have things like, evaluations or progress reports, or, reviews, or, Yelps, or any number of different things. But we also want to train people on trusted advisor abuse. that really, without getting this understanding of that trust can be used against you as well as for you. So let's just be careful and aware. I think that just lets people know, hey, this is an organization that is really focused on my safety. Could somebody say, oh, wow, why are you talking about this? It's safer and it's better for us to talk about this openly right now before it even happens, rather than wait until it happens and try to figure it out afterwards. In order to increase awareness that this is a form of perpetration, and usually these perpetrators are prolific perpetrators. They're extremely successful. They are getting, often based on false pretenses, but they're getting a lot of attention. They're getting a lot of reputational attention that your organization really wants to prevent this, because it's going to be your organization's reputation that is going to be affected even more so than the abuser's reputation. So keep that in mind, that we're really doing this to prevent harm organizationally, to keep organizations safe, and to keep students safe, right? And to keep individuals who are vulnerable safe. Then we have intervention. So this is information within my organization of what's trusted advisor abuse, what's the process to report it, to respond to it, and then here's how our organization is going to respond. We are opening up a trusted advisor abuse case. We are garnering relevant information. We are alerting the authorities. Then sometimes there is an actual case, right? Something has happened. So we're going to call that tertiary or treatment, although, in this case, treatment can include a prison sentence. But this is when now the police are involved. They've taken over the case. It's going to go to court or some sort of other resolution. There might be restitution from the perpetrator to the victim, which is, a continuing area of vulnerability. So we want to make sure that we're aware of that, as well as ongoing mental health or other victim services in order to help the victim population deal with the aftermath of not only the abuse happening, but then everybody knowing about it, generally everybody blaming the victims for it, and then kind of learning some sort of morality tale, and then maybe kind of reluctantly recognizing that the victim is actually a very brave and courageous truth teller. So, what we're going to ask people to do moving forward is to consider starting to use the phrase trusted advisor abuse. I actually want to bring Natasha and Sydney into this conversation, because what we're thinking about doing is creating a webinar or a self-certification for trusted advisor abuse for organizations to do, so that you can follow and have in policy some training and some language around trusted advisor abuse. So I want to bring in Natasha and Sydney and just ask them, what do you think might be some ways for organizations to implement protections, interventions, and maybe more effective, treatments and court experiences for victims? I'll bring Natasha in and then Sydney.
Yeah, so I think that, one thing especially that organizations can do is to be very transparent about their procedures, which you talked about before. And also, for example, even something similar to Seek Safety organization, like creating that pledge or, having that commitment to making sure that they protect their customers, their clients, and, to have their well-being in mind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sydney.
And I'm gonna steal what you say, Gabby, but moving away from a relational model which we oftentimes have spoken about in therapy and treatment centers, but moving away from a relational model in whether it's a self-help guru or in a Catholic church, and instead focusing on safety.
Yeah. Well, excellent points. I think transparency is how we create safety organizationally. And where there's a lot of secrets organizationally, generally, there's increased risk for trusted advisor abusers because they love secret organizations. They love it. And then what Sydney said, which is, a movement to allow us to at least start to perceive the distinction between the self and the relationship, right? That there's a me way before there's me, a student, or me, a parishioner, or me, any other relational title I might have, obedient daughter, or whatever it is. That there's a me, and that me is a vulnerable me, and that me has some vulnerabilities, and as a result is deserving of protections. So that there's an inner core. Some people might call that kind of an ego strength or internal locus of control, a sense of self, right? It's ironic that this Ray case is a self-help, but yet somehow you needed Ray, right? Turns out, you don't need Ray for self-help, but we do need safety for self-help, because people who are help seeking are by definition vulnerable to that helping relationship. I think folks are right, becoming more aware of our individual rights and exercising our individual rights. And then for us as professionals to really focus on, does this client have the ability to say no? And can this client hear other people when other people say no to them? And in organizations where folks are not allowed to say no, trusted advisor abusers are going to move in. And also in organizations where certain people do not have to tolerate being told no, trusted advisor abusers love those areas too. So, it's strange really investigating a form of perpetration, because what is uncovered is the sophistication of the perpetrator. Ray was not a self-help guru who decided to become, I don't know, a megalomaniac and kill people. Ray was an individual who was always self-centered, always self-motivated. And he used the self-help field to his own design. So for me, that's what I've uncovered over years of looking at these cases, which is that ultimately the perpetrator is looking for their perfect place. And their perfect place is one that holds reputation above facts, right? And who thinks that their own reputation is worth more than other people's safety. And that is fundamentally a perpetrative dynamic. The perpetrative dynamic is one where this relationship between you and me is more important than your safety. The safety model is fundamentally, your safety is way more important than this relationship right here. And let's make sure there are protections that allow you to speak up and to say something and be heard when you do. So trusted advisor abuse right now is a little bit like a puzzle piece that we're trying to slot into other more well-known forms of perpetration. But we think of it as a missing piece, that until we have the trusted advisor piece, in many ways, we're not able to even understand sexual assault, workplace harassment, and domestic violence, because we're not perceiving that abusive use of trust. Another thing that I just wanted to shout out there is that in addition to our upcoming podcast, in addition to our new website launch on August 21, we also have a pilot study, and it is called the Unsafe Behaviors Inventory Research Project, where we have a tool that measures unsafe behaviors and their reduction over time. The UBI is designed to help treatment providers assess their treatment and help clients measure reductions in risky and self-destructive behaviors. The results of this tool in our early pilot are very good. So Natasha is with us for one more week. So I highly recommend, if you want some more information about the Unsafe Behaviors Inventory and what is required to join us, please contact Natasha this week for links and more information. We measure using this speedometer right here, these unsafe behaviors. It's a pretty cool tool. And then, you know, as we move to the end of our webinar, Trusted Advisor Abuse reveals one of the great unspoken truths, which is no one, you know, perhaps with some sadness, you know, to realize this, no one should be trusted blindly. And where we start to become blind is where individuals often come to to settle in and take advantage of that blindness. So, you know, my hope fundamentally is that all of us can both be a safe connection to others, but that you are worthy of having a safe connection in your own life. You know, somebody who is there and promotes your safety above all. For all of us to be a safe connection, we know, respect laws, rights, and boundaries, and that there's a fundamental nonviolence in our efforts. Do no harm. That we use an invitational approach. We offer information to all, not just to those who I think need it. And as a result of the invitation, people can also decline, you know, that it's not a rescue. It's really just an offer. That we address the safety, security, and stability of the person in front of them, not anybody else, and especially not anybody else's reputation. That we stay focused in the present, in the here and now, what's going on now. Very often the future or the past is used to silence the victim. You know, oh, your future is going to be F you, you know what, if you say anything, or you saw what happened to X, Y, and Z, so you better not say anything. What's going on right now? You know, how can we protect this individual right now? Provide access to basic needs, especially when people are, you know, realizing what trusted advisor abuse is. That, you know, people will probably have physiological responses and feel some distress and require some water, some relief, maybe even some food to let themselves realize, hey, I can get through this. It's very helpful, really. That we can offer choices that are simple, clear, and within reach. I'm going to ask Sarah to find a link to Seeking Safety's Safe Coping Skills. And a shout out to Seeking Safety and Evidence-Based Treatment, which sounds a little bit like Seek Safely, which is a self-help, safety, self-protection kind of advocacy. But they're both really, really good. That we really emphasize actions, like what are you doing to make yourself safer, over feelings, right? I feel so torn and I feel so, you know, I'm betraying. Our feelings are indications and are good pieces of information, but it is our actions that we ultimately are responsible for, right? So I can have feelings and acknowledge them, but ultimately what can you do in your own safety is going to be our effort. And that we can repeat this information and give multiple formats. And as a matter of fact, many of the interns who have been working on trusted advisor abuse over the years, you know, have seen how helpful it is to use this model in order to understand sometimes complex dynamics. And I do remember one situation with a supervising therapist who was supervising a young trainee. And the young trainee had a client who had developed a romantic orientation towards the trainee therapist. And by using safe connection, and that this is not actually a relationship, but rather a safe connection to help you to have relationships, the supervisor was able to speak more specifically to the trainee. The trainee was able to speak more safely and specifically to the client, and the client was not seen as being, wrong, but just simply that is not the quality of this safe connection. So it helps us to really clarify some of the relational complexities of interacting with other human beings. And honestly, now that there's coronavirus, I think we're going to see that the self model, the safety model, the action-oriented model, the present-focused model is going to be very helpful for all of us. And then finally, I'm going to ask everybody here, just to ask people if they agree. And it can be as simple as this, which is, do you agree that there's inherent vulnerabilities to trusting somebody? Do you agree that learning about your rights will help you to protect yourself as you go through sports or school or, the clergy? So what we do in this model is we ask for agreement. Do you agree? Rather than understanding, right? Do you understand? That is a power imbalance. And what we're really saying in many cases with the do you understand is, do you understand what is going to happen to you if you don't tell me what I want to hear? And that is a fundamentally trusted advisor abuse. So we're going to be able to perceive these dynamics much more clearly too. And then we just simply ask for agreement. And so I'm going to ask, does anybody here agree perhaps to do any of the following? Number one, do you agree to use the term trusted advisor abuse? For example, a teacher who engages in sex with a student is committing, typos all over the place, guys, sorry about that. A teacher who is engaging in sex with a student is committing trusted advisor abuse, in addition to multiple crimes. Educate and inform your community, school board meetings or town halls with elected officials. Does your organization have clear training, reporting, and investigation procedures? Send newspaper links about cases of trusted advisor abuse to us, and we will post them, as many as we can. You can also agree to write a letter to the local paper, local legislators, local universities, demanding better oversight by boards, police, and others tasked with investigation and discipline of the people they license or certify. Are there teeth to these oversight bodies? And then refer people who have been abused to the website Stop Trusted Advisor Abuse so that they can get information about trusted advisor abuse and their rights and what they can do to stop it. Because in the end, the only thing that is binding the victim to the abuser in this case is trust. Now that feels like a very strong bond, but what's seen for what it is, it's actually a bond that can be removed immediately and safety can come in. So I want to thank everybody and encourage folks to go to the chat box and ask any questions. I'm going to ask first Natasha to come in with some final thoughts, and then Sydney to come in with her own personal thoughts about trusted advisor abuse in the webinar, and then some final thoughts from Sydney on any kind of technological items. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so as of now, we don't have any comments in the chat, but I just want to say thank you, Gabby, for the presentation. I think one thing that I'm really taking away from this is just how important it really is for the client to be able to say no and to have those boundaries, and to not feel pressured into doing anything they don't want to do. Because in the end, it's about them, it's about their well-being, and it's about their improvement.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and Natasha, if a person can't say no, can they ever consent? Is consent even possible?
I feel like consent is impossible if they're not able to say. Well, I mean, sometimes it really depends on the situation, but not saying no outright doesn't mean that they're giving consent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, the skill here for the individual is, are you able to say no? And are you able to tolerate other people saying no to you? And that's a skill for all of us to practice. Thank you, Natasha. And thank you for a whole summer worth of effort in promoting trusted advisor abuse. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Gabby.
And Sydney, final thoughts on trusted advisor abuse and final instructions, technologically speaking.
Thank you so much for giving this presentation. I really liked the spin on it. Natasha, I think you did a really good job. I thought the whole James Frey case was and is so interesting, and I've really enjoyed learning about it today. We recorded today's webinar, so we'll make sure to post it on our YouTube, and we can send everyone who's registered a link if you want to go back and look at anything. And don't hesitate to email any of us privately if you have any questions, if you want access to any links or anything we mentioned. And thanks everyone for coming.
Well, fantastic, Sydney. Thank you so much for being the tech guide. Thank you, everybody, for coming on to Trusted Advisor Abuse. Check out our podcast. We'll send all of you, a reminder about it. And then August 21st, we do have a virtual launch party, Funfetti themed. And we also have the UBI. So there's a lot of ways that you can stay in contact with us and be a part of our efforts to make a lot of different systems safer. With that, everybody, I want to say thank you and see you later. Bye.